Hi everyone, my name is Ryan Osborn and I am the Rhodes University SRC Projects Manager for 2020. Welcome to the SRC Student Media Colloquium of 2020. Today we will be discussing the rise and fall of student media at the Purple University. We have got a presentation on mapping the media ecology of Makanda, which has been put together by Rod Amner, who is part of the journalism department at Rhodes University. Then we will be starting off today's program with our media councillor for the year 2020, Xiletelo Mabasa, who will be delivering the keynote address.
Hello everyone, my name is Xiletelo Mabasa. I am the 2020 SRC Media Councillor. And welcome to the first Student Media Colloquium hosted by the Rhodes University SRC and recognizing our student media organizations Activate, RMR, and the Opidan Press. Student media is something that I am very passionate about. Having a journalism background, my journey with student media and with journalism began at the University of Johannesburg during my undergrad days. At the time, we had just lost our only campus newspaper. And so a couple of friends and some classmates of mine, we got together and we began a newspaper, a news organization online called the Open Journal. And that was to afford ourselves the opportunity to practice journalism and to expand our knowledge of the field and to be able to explore the happenings on our campus and to inform and educate fellow students about what was happening within our campus. We did experience quite a few hurdles in this because the processes for becoming a society, for example, at our university were a little bit more complicated than here at Rhodes. You needed funds to be able to start a society. From what I understand, this might be a different case right now, but there was a lot that was very difficult in us, officializing our organization. But regardless, we pushed through and we tried to reach out to other institutions, and we found other students as well that were able to join our organization and use the tools that they had and to collaborate with us to expand the project towards their campuses as well. And coming to Rhodes University in my postgrad years, I was very thirsty for the experience of student media, so to speak. And I was able to quench that thirst by firstly joining the Opidan Press as a politics editor and also joining Rhodes Music Radio, firstly as a news reader and then as a presenter. And this was a very enriching experience, being able to work on both sides of, different sides rather of the media industry within student media, and was a very exciting one. I was really looking forward to soaking up the experience of student media on campus. I also got to learn a lot about Activate this year as their honorary SRC member, learning about their inner workings, aligning with their editors, getting to learn how they conduct themselves and really from a distance, just observing how they do things. And the idea for this colloquium was birthed through a need and a desire for student media to be more active in their role, not just on campus, but also in the Makanda community. At first, it was a very iffy presentation or proposal that I handed over to the journalism department. But later on, this idea developed, and it was more about how do we start the conversation and bring it past a conversation to the point that we have practical steps towards improving the status of student media. I couldn't help but continue to hear stories from friends and classmates who, whenever they heard that I was part of student media, that student media had its heyday at Rhodes University, and all of a sudden that isn't there anymore. And so I wanted to contribute in some way to either starting the conversation about reviving student media or to help find practical solutions towards this. And I understand in conversations towards building the student media colloquium, towards planning it, that there were a lot of hurdles, a lot of barriers, whether it's not knowing which university stakeholders or structures to approach, or how to solidify these relationships, how to mend, in some cases, broken relationships. And there was a lot of disconnect as well with different student media organizations being parties that were formerly in fierce competition with each other, which must have been such an exciting time to be on campus as a student and watching student media being so vibrant and creating this space for debate. And student media are still recognized because of that legacy, and students acknowledge and understand that student media are powerful, particularly at Rhodes University, a university that is known for its journalism curriculum. And it really does create not only frustration from the student media organizations and their members themselves, but also from the student body, who want to have a very vibrant space for debate, who want to have, student organizations whose job is to inform and entertain, to create that space for debate for them, to hold the SRC accountable, to inform them, to investigate, to bring forth truths that they need to know as a student body. And there was just so much opportunity that I could see, that my fellow student leaders could see, that was lost here. And it's just to a point where we must all be tired at this point of hearing about the heyday of student media. And what we need and what we want at this point would be to push forward to a point where we get past just having conversations about how we can do better and, I have these many ideas, to a point where there are practical solutions being implemented. And students themselves, whether they are journalism students, whether they are ordinary students studying something else, all of us can benefit from having a healthy student media. There is so much power that student media holds, being able to investigate and to push forward knowledge that students don't themselves know. And I think that this would create a situation that students feel more empowered in their experience at the university, having so much knowledge. And this really does start with having a solid relationship and building a solid relationship with academic departments, with specific institutions within the university, such as the communications division, with RUS and community partners, to connect us with members of the community, with organizations within the community, so that we can get to learn about what is happening in the world around us, because this is good practice for when we go out into the world, not only as young journalists, but also as young people, as citizens, about how to interact with the world around us so that we can actually be change agents. Working in tandem with people and not trying to save them from things. And I think that there is so much wealth in opportunity and knowledge and drive and creativity in student media that is being underutilized in some way. And there's so much that we can do to push student media forward. And this is the conversation that I wanted to start with the Student Media Colloquium. And I really hope that these could be a great platform for us not only converse about this, but to try and imagine a situation in which student media at Rhodes University not only looks like what it did before, but can get to a point where it pushes far beyond that threshold that it had reached prior. Thank you.
Thank you, Xiletelo. That was, again, Xiletelo Mabasa, the 2020 SRC Media Councillor, speaking to us about the rise and fall of student media at Rhodes University. One thing I've learned about Xiletelo, she is dedicated to media. She is dedicated to the benefit of media, especially in the student context. She has recreated and reinvented what the media portfolio in the SRC has been. She has been incredible. She's been a great asset to the SRC for 2020. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank her. I also want to remind everyone that the session with Rod Anna will be posted on the Rhodes University SRC YouTube page, so you can please follow that. So I now think I'm going to open up a conversation between two of our guests that have been invited from the student media organizations at Rhodes today. First, we have the Opedan Press Deputy Editor, Emily, is a fourth-year journalism student who is specializing in design. Emily's role at the Opedan Press involves the design and layout of the paper, illustrations, article writing, and editing. Lat has always wanted to be involved in the media and she has a huge passion for student media at Rhodes University. So Emma, Emily, I don't know if you want to say hello.
Yeah, thank you for that one introduction. Very glad to be here.
And then next, we want to introduce Sian Wilson, who is the Activate editor, who is currently, she has been at Rhodes since 2018. She is very involved in student media. She believes the practical learning and skills sharing environment hosted by student media organizations is of paramount importance for young aspiring journalists. Although she may struggle to share her own voice, she can do her best to project the voices for others. Activate is journalism by students for everyone. So Sian, I don't know if you want to say hello. Hi, babe.
Hello.
Sorry about that. There was a bit of a internet delay. So firstly, I just want to welcome you both to the conversation and thank you for joining us today. I just wanted to ask you guys, with regards to having a student media colloquium, do you think this kind of platform is beneficial for student media to have these conversations?
I can start then. So I think it's very beneficial to have these conversations. It's one of the big things that I feel that maybe isn't always spoken about on campus in terms of student media and stuff like that. It's things people know. And if you are in the journalism route, you probably have worked in some form of student media, whereas RR with us or with Activate. But the general populace, usually because they feel that they don't have any writing skills or they don't have any interest in that, don't always really acknowledge us unless they need something in terms of information and stuff like that. So I think in a big part, getting out the name of the fact that student media is here and we want to listen, we want to find out more to, I guess, a larger audience, not just to the first years we see at the society's evening or a couple people who kind of talk to you when you're handing out newspapers and stuff like that, or people who engage on your platforms. It's really beneficial to be able to talk about why we're important, and then also hear why people think that we are good or bad or where we could improve as well.
Thank you for that contribution. I just wanted to ask if maybe both of you, maybe first starting with Opedan Press and then we can go to Activate, if you could just give us the vision and mission of your student media organization, what sets you guys apart, what you guys stand for, and basically what you promote as an organization.
You said starting with me, correct?
Yes, please.
Okay, cool. So the Opedan Press, I can't remember when we started, but we started way back when. And our general mission statement is to give information to the students. So we work on mainly a kind of more political base, if I want to say that. We worked on with like student issues and things that are happening on campus and around, the things that we think students need to know. And we are the only student media organization that works with print. So we have a print newspaper that normally would come out 4 times a year. And this is something we've continued throughout. And yeah, our general practice is that we want to allow students to tell the stories they want to tell. When they see a problem, I want them to be able to investigate it and discover, are there any solutions, or just informing people that this is a thing that happens. So I think that's our general mandate.
Cool, thank you. And Activate?
Sorry, bit of a delay. Activate started in 1947 as a newspaper that was circulated weekly. and since then has developed to be entirely and primarily online. As a publication, we're a bit of a chameleon in so much that we have developed and changed over time to accommodate for the changes in society around us as well. So Activate's vision as a publication entirely online these days is, like I said, to provide a voice to the voiceless and to be journalism for everyone, not just journalism for students by students. Beyond that, we try to be as inclusive with our content as possible and to move beyond just the traditional journalistic practices and incorporate a lot more of a well-rounded, almost palatable form of journalism too. So we've developed a myriad of different sections that students, not just journalism students, but students throughout the campus can feel encouraged to write for, to express themselves through. And our overall goal, I think, is to add on to what Xiletelo said in the beginning about student media having its heyday and having already developed a legacy. That's very much true, but I think student media in this day and age, speaking for Activate and Opidum Press and RMR as well, I think might be to develop a new legacy and to carry that on for an additional heyday, so to speak.
Thank you for that contribution. I like that you made reference to Xiletelo and what she spoke about, because I was actually going to ask you guys both about that. So we've heard a lot about Rhodes Student Media having had its heyday. So what do you think made the heyday that Rhodes Student Media has already gone through so great? And how can we build onto that to almost come to a place where the student media currently is also having, like we've just heard from the editor of Activate, another heyday, so to speak.
So I mean, I can just jump in here. In terms of, I think that Opidum Press's heyday, and recently as well, was really big around the protests that happened on campus. And I think in a large part, what contributed to that heyday is the need to always have information. So to have information of what was happening, what you can be doing and things like that, that strives journalism, because especially when things are constantly happening, it's forcing journalists to go out there and be constantly reporting, be looking, engaging. And I think one of the big things about that as well is that it forces an audience to want to engage, because they want to know what's happening. They want to be amongst the first people to find out what is going on, like, is it safe to do something or not? And then in terms of kind of encouraging a new heyday, I think one of the biggest things that all student media needs to do, I know that Activate is starting to cultivate this a bit more, and on LP we're trying, but we are just still like learning, is to try and get the general student population that is not within the journal department, because the journal department is very isolated. It's a good department and it's great, but it's a very isolated department in some ways. So we need to try and get the general student population on board with student media and looking at it as a very reputable source to go to. And also looking at it as a place that they can go to try skills that they maybe don't, especially if they're not in journalism, for studying in terms of like testing out writing, learning about design and layouts, learning about graphics, photography, things like that, to try and encourage those skills, as well as the skills that you learn usually when you work in student media in terms of how to work out what's a reputable source, how to spot fake news, and just kind of how to go through information and how to break down information for someone else to be able to read it nicely. So in my opinion, I think the way to kind of recapture the heyday is to look at the student population and look at what people want and need right now, and kind of start dissecting how we can change the face of the student media to actually now move more towards their direction, rather than trying to make them come to us.
Thank you. That's very interesting. I heard you say something about Activate doing very well at managing to almost acclimatize non-journalism students to being part of student media. So I don't know if the editor of Activate can maybe add on to that, how you guys are managing to do that. How are you managing to recapture the attention of the student body to build onto your student media organization?
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you, Emily. Well, firstly, just before I speak on that, I'd also like to add to how we can move towards a new heyday for student media online. And I do think it comes down to primarily 3 different things. The first would be credibility. Obviously, as journalists, that's one of the onuses that we kind of strive to achieve as student media. But since we, you know, same as Opidum Press, we did have our heyday during the protests on campus, where students did turn to student journalism to give them frontline information. And then after that, it did take a toll on the existing teams between 2016 and 2018. So there was a huge turnover for members and staff on the editorial board. So which leads me to my next thing is commitment. Commitment is quite heavily wavering within student media, simply because I think beyond it being parallel to academic stress, it's also a responsibility and a job that's not given much credit, at least not by the student body, and probably also not by the journalism department in particular. And so students only commit insofar as they feel they need to. And that's something that can only be tackled when the student press itself promotes a certain level of commitment from its members, especially from its editorial board. And that's something that I think Activate did really well towards the end of last year, and particularly this year, when we employed new members to take on editorial roles within Activate. We stipulated quite clearly what the responsibilities would be and how they would need to be carried out. So no one was blindsided. Everyone knew that they had to commit for at least a year, whereas previously these positions were semesterized for 6 months at a time, which isn't conducive to the functionality of a student press, I think. And then the third thing would probably be identity. And I think in order for all 3 student media to succeed on campus in the coming years, there would need to be a definable identity between all 3 of them. Activate is solely online. Opidum Press is unique because it was still doing print news, and RMR is a radio media organization. And in order for us to revert back to that healthy competition that we did have, we need to have clearly defined identities so that students know not only can they participate in organizations that they feel speak to their individual identities, but they also know where to go when they want to consume particular kinds of media. So I think those 3 things are what we need to consider in order to re-emerge into a new heyday for student media.
Thank you for that. So I heard something about the journalism department. So do you have any recommendations on how the journalism department could better the involvement of non-journalism students? Also, maybe other offices or departments of Rhodes University, perhaps the Communications and Advancement Division or the SRC Media Office per se. I know that Xiletelo's tried to work closely with the heads of the organizations and the organizations themselves by way of the Student Media Colloquium. But are there any other suggestions that you and the deputy editor of the Opidum Press could perhaps suggest in bettering the involvement, or how these departments and offices could help you?
Yes, thank you, Ryan. I do have one particular idea that I have spoken to on occasion, and I have also brought it up with Rod rather informally. But the one idea that I did have was speaking solely to the level of commitment that we get from first years in JMS. So I haven't really thought about how to get the greater student body involved, but as far as student media in the eyes of students studying journalism, I posed to Rod the question of possibility to make the 40-hour vacation requirement work that is already compulsory in first and second year to be kept in-house, so to speak. So currently in first year, you acquire your 40-hour vacation work from either student media, or you can outsource and work for a publication nationwide, which is all good and well, but it really highlights the disparities and the opportunities that different students have. So instead, I'd pose to him the question of whether or not the journalism department can maintain the 40-hour compulsory requirement, but instead encourage students to join any of the 3 student media organizations on campus, as opposed to outsourcing their experiences in other publications across the country, simply so that they know that they can commit to us for at least 1 year and develop a myriad of different skills over that course of 1 year, as opposed to just doing 40 hours and gaining what you gain, whether you gain anything at all from, say, SABC or CNN, if you were to outsource. So that's the one idea that I did have. And I know Rod is pondering it, but I haven't heard anything more.
So I agree with kind of having it more integrated thing part of the year. I think that a lot of people look at it a bit, I wouldn't say incorrectly, to say like 40 hours, so 1 week, and that's kind of like all the experience you're going to get. I think definitely in terms of a broader scope of understanding a newsroom and understanding how the dynamics of a newsroom work and just a news team in general work, it's a lot better in terms of your development as a journalist, or even just as someone who wants to learn something about like communications and stuff like that, in order to be there for a longer period than 1 week, in order to see those dynamics really evolve. And then also jumping onto kind of maybe how the SRC and the media group can get involved, I think it would be very interesting to see, I know there's a media team part of the SRC under the councillor, so maybe to see groups of those teams being assigned to the various student medias on campus, and how they kind of form kind of a connection with that, and help bolster the student media through the SRC. So, I mean, not playing favorites or anything, everyone has like, saying Activate is slightly different to Opidan and RMR stuff as well, as much as Opi also, we do podcasting and we do online stuff. Our majority of our stuff is on print. So I think you can balance the organizations fairly and just help, I want to say, yeah, bolster it through the SRC, because the SRC has a much bigger platform than I think any one student media organization could ever have. So if we had maybe just a couple of representatives that go to each organization and they work with them. So you work throughout the year, we help promote the SRC helps promote us. It's kind of like an interesting way of learning more to work together, because I think for a long time, student media and the SRC has been very, very separate. So maybe in order to improve, we need to look at ways that we can enhance our relationship instead. So, yeah.
In terms of that point, I really like what you said about the media office being almost assigned or associated with certain student media organizations. But in terms of that, then how can the SRC be, how can it be ensured that the SRC is then not seen to be influencing what is said in the student media? As student media, like Xiletelo said in her opening speech, that student media almost is there to also hold leadership accountable, hold student leadership like the SRC accountable, hold the university itself accountable. So how do you think then, involving the SRC, we can draw a line between the SRC not influencing and proving that the SRC then isn't having a certain influence or sway on the general student media organizations at Rhodes?
So obviously this would also kind of depend on an editor, because an editor and deputy editors in the team does have a lot of sway in terms of what's done. But I think how you look at it is that they are treated as if they are staff, but they also are linked to the SRC. So it's not necessarily that they are bringing in any biases or anything like that. They are still staff members on your media team. It's just that they have this link and there can be this promotion. I think an important thing to look at is that, especially in higher roles in student media, so editors, deputy editors, and things like that, you need to have some kind of media ethics backing, which usually comes in third year for journalism students. And if you, as much as it's a partnership, you need to also be able to say this, to take a step back and say, well, the line is drawn here. You are not going to write any of our stories for us in terms of like an SRC writing a story and we run it. Unless it's an opinion piece and it be completely like clearly marked and stuff like that. Rather have them working as part of the team in order to produce something. So you're not ever getting that kind of cross lines of biased, I feel. And instead and the same thing, like you wouldn't ever give the SRC something and say, this is what you have to work with. Hope that makes sense.
Yes, I get what you're saying. Activate, I don't know if you have anything to contribute to that.
I agree in part with what Emily was saying about distributing the media team across the media organizations. However, since Activate is an independent student press, there's a little bit of a concern insofar as how involved the SRC is with how we manage and organize our organization. I'm not sure how Opidum Press or RMR are managed or if they have that same concern, but having just an honorary member as a stipulation for being a society on campus, I think is sufficient in some way. But I do think where the link could be drawn between student media and the SRC is that the SRC can use the student media to share particular student body related stories to the student body. I know the SRC often just posts on their particular forums, and the student body is or relies heavily on that distribution of information. So I think if some of that responsibility was shared across the student organizations, student media organizations, then that might help create somewhat of a link. But as far as members of SRC being involved in how a media organization is run or managed, I have some hesitations about that.
I completely understand. It's the same with the SRC also being an independent body. There are certain media platforms that we don't engage on for specific reasons, or certain media platforms that we are invited to that we discuss before we attend, because as an SRC we're also independent, so we also have to make sure we're all standing for the same thing. So I completely understand that. But then how moving to a more student media based sort of collaboration, how do you think RMR, Opidum Press, Activate, all the student media organizations can almost work together to further the building up of student media at Rhodes?
Immediately, the first thing that comes to mind when you ask that question is advertising or marketing, for lack of a better theory. Simply because a lot of what we hear in Activate, I don't know if it's the same for the other organizations once more, but a lot of what we hear is that students aren't aware of us. They don't know that we exist. And obviously that is primarily our own fault. We need to make our presence more widely known, but no one has a greater presence on campus than the SRC. So for example, during orientation or O Week, if the SRC were to align themselves with particular student media organizations during O Week, then that might help bolster our image as well. If there were an event that the organizations held in their respective capacities that the SRC then promoted and vice versa, that might help set a bit of a precedent. Also, if we get recognition from the SRC, then that might also help our attendance and how many members we have joining us in each new year. So not being directly affiliated, I suppose, in the sense that the SRC and student media would be involved in the inner workings of each body. But if we could use our platforms to increase visibility for each other, then that might help.
I'm just going to jump in here a little bit as well and add that I think it would be really interesting to see. So just to kind of clarify a little bit my old arguments, I'm not really saying that the SRC should be involved in the running, but more just that we have some link in terms of the members and stuff like that with underneath. So it's some kind of partnership between, which we haven't really had before. And especially talking from someone, our honorary member wasn't as active in our kind of society life and stuff like that. So I think it very much depends on the individual SRC person that would be like assigned to your society or to your student media organization. So it's hard to say that that is the perfect balance as a partnership. So considering from our point of view, we haven't really had that big relationship before. And then to talk about kind of, jumping off how we could maybe work with promoting more. I think also we need to do away with some of the kind of old prejudices of the fight between us, and we need to actually promote each other as well. I think if you think about the kind of general student media collective, in order to rise us all up, we need to actually help each other. We're planning to do a couple of things as the Open Press with RMR, which kind of just fell through because of COVID and all the kind of differences that happened this year. But maybe we need to kind of look at doing things like that where as Open Press we can work in partnership with Activate, as you guys have a bigger online presence compared to us, and vice versa. We have a print presence, which our newspapers are distributed across campus. We could maybe get some of your stories, and obviously with credit and with information that this is from Activate. The same then for RMR. You think about how the newsreaders, I worked as a newsreader for RMR in first year. It's very much a slip every day to be double checking your articles and stuff like that. If we could maybe have a database like a Google Drive or something like that, where we can share articles and stuff like that for then the newsreaders to talk about, for the presenters to talk about. And it just fosters this relationship with a buzz on campus, no matter which organization you follow or you read and stuff like that, you're hearing about the other ones as well. So that would be just my idea.
I actually like what you're saying there about supporting each other in terms of maybe advertising, like RMR speaking to Opidan Press or to Activate, or the sharing of content is also a good idea. But I think platforms like this allow for conversations like that, and when this does go live, I think there'll be a lot of suggestions, which I do hope are all written down and taken into account by the incoming committees of the student media organizations, as well as the incoming SRC Media Councillor and the incoming media team and those applying for these positions. I think these kind of conversations are important if you want to further the conversation and further the development of these brands. So in terms of the student media organizations at Rhodes, how do they work with more official media organizations in terms of on a national scope, such as Brocott's Mail? How do you think, or how do the student media organizations work with places such as Brocott's Mail, the School of Journalism, the Communications Department, Communications and Advancement Division? Do you guys ever approach these divisions? What would you like to see happen with these specific divisions? What way forward would you prefer to see with Brocott's Mail, Journalism and Media Studies Department? Yes, so any contributions on that?
Okay, I suppose I'll go. So far as outsourcing other organizations within Activate, we don't really rely on other departments. Like I said, we're an independent organization, so we don't really even rely on the School of Journalism. which I've already propositioned Rod to be changed ever so slightly, in that the School of Journalism gives us more credit, or instills a lot more authenticity and credibility within us using their particular voice and platform. But if you're asking about how our media reaches beyond the four walls of Makanda, then it's really up to how relatable our stories are. We've had several instances of different newspapers and other publications across the country, from KwaZulu-Natal to Johannesburg, contacting us to republish stories that our writers have written because it speaks to what's going on in their particular communities. And it also just speaks to how well we promote our website, our writers, and how well our writers promote themselves. So that's all I can really say about that. We don't really actively seek other platforms out for support, which we probably could do in the near future. But like I said, in terms of staff handover, we've been trying to stabilize our editorial board first before we start branching out a little beyond that. But we do get cross-published, and we are open to cross-publishing. Nothing is set on our website, and which I think allows the writers a lot more freedom and capacity.
So then if I can just ask you, what is your goal, your personal goal, or maybe it's your committee's goal for 2024, your student media organization, and how do you think you guys have done in achieving that? I think of Open Press, you say that you do a lot of print. So obviously having to adapt to Corona times and COVID-19, how have you guys adapted your normal strategy, and how are you continuing your constant involvement in the student media and publication of student media and student-related content?
So I'm not going to lie, this year has been very much a struggle for us. Primarily being a print organization, that's what people mainly know us for. Our main goal this year was actually to get kind of a very similar to Activate. We had a very turbulent end of last year in terms of our executive committee and editors and stuff like that. So we've been trying to kind of rebuild from the ground up this year, which really took a knock because of COVID. So we have done some kind of like lockdown stuff, and we did some kind of more creative writing people were talking about in terms of their experiences during lockdown and online learning. And we have been collecting those to kind of create this bulk edition that we will be publishing at the end of the year, to just kind of almost time capsule this time, because it's been a very interesting and different time for us. And moving forward is a very interesting conversation we're having about, like we do normally publish our publications online as well, but like primarily people know us because they see the paper in the library, or they see it in their department or wherever they are, and they pick it up. So we're having very much a lot of conversations about how we kind of promote this to people on more platforms like Facebook and on other social media platforms. So like that's again the partnership with the SRC. Maybe we have kind of like sections which are from the SRC site that link to kind of sources, so that students, especially the first years, if they don't have like on-campus learning to begin with, get information about stuff. And I think it's one of these things where I look back at what we've done this year, and I'm not 100% sure if we've achieved our goals in large part, because it's very hard, especially with students who we had a very big first year base. So students who are already struggling with online learning, and then trying to do kind of other deadlines in terms of to get the them to the editors, and then to get them to the designers and illustrators and stuff like that. But it's been an interesting experience, and it's a very much a learning experience. And we think moving forward, we've written kind of some advice moving forward for the people who are going to take over from us next year. And like, it's very hard to say because the future is very uncertain right now. But I think the best way that we're going to go is we're going to try and have as much as we can online, while still trying to keep that print identity, because it is something that we feel is very special about our organization to still have printed media available.
If I may add, I really empathize with Opidum Press a lot in terms of how they must have struggled being a primarily print-based publication. But I agree, it's been a really, really difficult year for student media. It's usually quite a difficult year, regardless of the year, for student media, because of commitment from writers and from editorial boards or executive teams. But how Activate has kind of kept afloat this year, we've been fortunate enough to have established quite a rigid standard for the level of commitment we expect from writers and then from members of the editorial board, at least towards the end of last year. So by the time this year had begun, we'd already had a very strong team. We also had a very strong presence in the first couple of months among the first year students in the journalism department, which set a pretty good precedent for how the rest of the year would roll out. Unfortunately, because we are mostly online, the only thing that we really had to adapt to was having our newsroom meetings on digital platforms like WhatsApp. Beyond that, we've really struggled, as I'm sure everyone has, to just keep people committed to communicating. But insofar as managing to continuously produce content, I think where Activate thrives is that we do allow students to write about anything their heart desires. Nothing is off limits. We're not so localized that we can only write local content. You can write about international news, international affairs, current affairs, local news, entertainment, journalism, pretty much anything your heart desires. We've also recently introduced a poetry and prose section so that writers feel less pressure to produce journalistic work and they can work as creative writers too. And where writers fail to commit to their tasks as members, then the editors pick up that slack. So whenever content is lagging on our website, we, as the editorial board, I think there's about 12 of us now, we pick up the slack for our particular sections and we produce the content where content is needed. So I think in that way we've adapted pretty swiftly to how this year has unfolded, and we've already made particular measures and predictions for how next year will unfold. And so we're pretty set on maintaining this trajectory for next year.
I think just before we close off, I just want to ask you guys what you would say to an aspiring student media organization, a possible person to join one of the student media organizations. What would you say? What would your words of encouragement or your reasoning for joining student media be?
I'd say primarily, if definitely for one, if you're a journalism student, I think it's a really, really big active part of your journalism career, and I think it's really, it has more benefit than I think anyone can actually say. Like, I've been in student media since I was in first year. I've been in various student media houses over the years, and I have enjoyed every minute of it, and I've learned something new pretty much every time there's a newsroom meeting or there's something going on. And then just to general students who maybe aren't journalism students, who look at student media and feel that they aren't able to do it because maybe they don't have the writing skills or something like that. I think that media, especially with Opidum Press, is a lot more than just writing. We teach people how to lay out newspapers, we take on artists, we take on photography, like people, and all those skills, we help teach you and develop those skills with you. And like our OP TV, so we've done video, we have OP podcasting, we'll teach you how to record audio, how to cut it, how to create an interesting podcast. It's a lot more diverse than just writing, although writing, we have a big department too, if that's interesting to you. And I think it's always a skill that is really important for you to have. Even if you are never ever thinking of going to journalism in your life, experiences with newsrooms will help you with teamwork, with communication. It can help you gain skills in terms of deadlines, in terms of interviewing, and in terms of interviewing as well, just saying that like it's very sometimes important to be the interviewer sometimes. So then when you are being interviewed, like for job interviews and things like that, you're not as nervous because you've been on the other side and you know how this structure is going to work. And then in terms of writing, you know, writing journal articles is very different to writing essays, but the skills that we equip you with in terms of research and how to write and how to look at things differently can be very beneficial no matter what degree you are doing. I think one of the big things that I'd say is stop looking at student media just being a journalism thing. It's so much more than that, and it's a great experience that you can have, especially at a university like Rhodes, which offers such diverse options for you for student media. Like, it's not worth missing it.
I think what I would say as a journalism student in my third year, I've learned more being part of student media than I have throughout my 3 years in the School of Journalism. That's not to say at all in the slightest that the School of Journalism here is lacking. It's definitely not, but those practical skills that they teach you about but you don't put into practice, those skills are put into practice tenfold when you join student media. And more than that, it's such a eclectic environment in so much that you are coming into contact with people from different backgrounds, people of different demographics, people with different voices, and you are working closely together with these people to share your thoughts, opinions, and ideas about the world with a greater community. And I think that's something that you can't do in a lecture hall as freely as you would in a newsroom. Then speaking just as a media consumer and a media creator, I agree with Emily. Student media is not just a journalism thing, it's an artistic form, I think, where photography, videography, and audio journalism are involved. There's so much creative processes that go into that, and there's design, there's art, there's writing, there's social media management, and in the digital age, there's no better place to learn how to maneuver all these spaces than in a student media newsroom, especially because everything that we learn is ultimately in part, or in probably majority, self-learned and self-taught, and everything that people in editorial positions within Activate in particular, everything that we learn is trickled down almost at a faster pace than you would learn in a university course. So in the same way that joining a student media organization prepares you for the world outside, I think it also gives you a bit of a leg up in terms of what you're studying at university, regardless of the department. There are so many skills that are transcendent beyond just journalism, and I think student media needs to be given credit where credit is due in that regard.
For those contributions, and thank you for joining us today in the first item on the program for the Student Media Colloquium. I've really enjoyed facilitating you guys today. I really enjoy conversations like this. Anything about bettering student involvement, student knowledge, student know-how, I'm all for it. It's one of my favorite parts of being on SRC is seeing all these different aspects of Rhodes and how they all contribute to making Rhodes the place it is and the incredible, diverse, and accepting place that it is. So I just want to thank you both for joining us, and I also want to just remind everyone that tomorrow our theme for the Student Media Colloquium will be improving the relationship between student media, the SRC Media Office, the university stakeholders, and the Makana media community. That will be happening tomorrow, so please do join us. And with that, I will be wrapping up today's conversation. Thank you for joining us.